Check, check. Microphone check. You have to, it's going to take a minute to copy. Yeah. All right, so I apologize, but I went to render this file and I wasn't paying attention, and it was 1.6 gig, which Proclaim won't let you upload anything over 600 meg. And at that point then, it's like, okay, what am I going to do to re-render it? And it's longer than I intended to, so that's frustrating. But I didn't want to cut anything, so I was like, all right, it's like 10 minutes long. I was like, all right, I'm just going to go with it. I don't know, with my baseball team, I might edit it down a little bit. Their attention span is really, really short. You guys have a little more tolerance for discussion of biblical material. For them, I'm probably going to have to squeeze that down to like 6 minutes. But anyway, so tonight's theme is the microphone on? Check, check. Is it? I can't tell, but you can tell. Okay, all right. I can't hear myself. Part of it is that one of my two hearing aids didn't charge overnight, so it's in, but it's not doing anything. Yeah. So this morning, in fact, I kept thinking the microphone was cutting in and out, and I was convinced it was cutting in and out. After the service, they said, no, it was fine. And I think it's because out of my left ear, if I turned a certain way, I couldn't pick it up. And so tonight's discussion is on servant leadership, which is a very common theme among discussions of Christian or spiritual leadership. It's very different than secular leadership books. You can buy books on leadership from the secular perspective, and many of them are driven around management styles and team building and things like that. But usually spiritual leadership or Christian leadership themes are often driven around modeling after Jesus' own leadership style. And we find that Jesus, in his own leadership style, was not worried about some of the kinds of things that secular leadership would be today, about clear demarcation between leader and follower, who's in charge, these kinds of things, whereas Jesus seems to not be clinging to these kinds of things. In fact, the great example of this comes from Paul himself in Philippians chapter 2, where he says that Jesus is the attitude example for us. Have this attitude in yourselves, which is also in Christ Jesus. And the example of the attitude of Christ Jesus is his servant attitude or servant's heart. So, all right, there you go. So, I apologize for the delay. At Southwestern Seminary in Fort Worth, and there's a very pretty area there. If you've ever been to the seminary, it's got a little pond, and there's several sculptures right there in that area. And so if you've never been able to visit, it's a really great place to go. And yeah, it's one of the prettier campuses in the area. Yeah, Southwestern Theological Seminary, Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth. Yeah, it's I-20 and McCart, I think, are right in that area, almost to McCart, maybe the exit before. And yeah, it's tucked away in there. All right, how's it doing copy-wise? You're kidding. Your USB reader went faster. My PC's a little bit old, so yeah. Okay, so tonight the video is on Jesus and the disciples in the upper room. And it's shot at Southwestern Seminary. Today for the leadership video, I'm filming from the campus of Southwestern Theological Seminary in Fort Worth. I actually went to school here, spent a lot of my life over here. This is a really beautiful campus, one of the prettier campuses in the DFW area. And behind me is a sculpture done. It depicts a significant moment in the life of Jesus where Jesus is seen washing Simon Peter's feet. You might remember this event from the biblical record in John's Gospel, John chapter 13. Jesus has come into Jerusalem in the triumphal entry. They've had a week of encounters between Jesus and the religious leaders. And as it comes to the culmination of that week, at the end of that week leads into Passover, and you might remember that on the night before Jesus' arrest and subsequent crucifixion, that he's with the disciples in the upper room in Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover meal with his disciples. And historically, interestingly enough, is that the Galilean Jews celebrated days differently than the Judean Jews. So in the case of the Galilean Jews, it was sun up to sun up, and the Galilean Jews then were always a day ahead on the Passover celebration for the Judean Jews, who were sundown to sundown. And so Jesus' disciples celebrate Passover one day, and then the next day the Judean Jews would celebrate the Passover meal together, which is why in the Bible Jesus celebrates Passover meal on one day, and the next day we're told that at the sacrifice of the lambs for Passover, Jesus is crucified. And so you might wonder, well, how does that happen? How is it that Jesus can celebrate Passover one day, and then the next day, while Passover is being celebrated or being prepared to be celebrated, Jesus is crucified? And the answer is that the Galilean Jews, which is where Jesus and his disciples were primarily from, had celebrated the Passover historically the evening before the Judean Jews did. And so Jesus is with his disciples the night of celebrating Passover. And as they come into the upper room, they've borrowed this home. And the reason the home's available, it's a Judean home. And so they don't need to celebrate Passover in this home until the next day. And so they borrowed this home. The family seemingly vacated the home for them and left it for Jesus and his disciples. And as they arrive, there's a tradition that the family, especially a wealthy home, a wealthy family, this seems to be a wealthy family in the Essene community in Jerusalem at that time period, would normally have a servant wash the feet of those who came to the home as visitors. And for whatever reason, it may be that the family has vacated the premises entirely for Jesus and his disciples, so much so that they even have the servants go with them. So there's no one there to wash the feet of the guest. Now, in ancient time, this was a big deal because the roads are made of dirt, unlike this very concrete sidewalks everywhere we go, concrete roads, grass growing everywhere. In Jesus' day, there are livestock everywhere. The roads are dirt, and it's dusty. When it rains, people would get very dirty. Their feet especially get very dirty. Shoes at that time were very primitive. You have a piece of leather with just some straps and holding it on, and so your feet would be filthy. And in addition to all that, unlike us where we would go to eat a meal together, we would sit at a table with our feet underneath the table. In Jesus' day, they reclined on pillows during the Passover and would recline, and therefore your feet were at the same level as the dining area. And so it was a disrespectful thing to not have your feet clean before dining, and it was a disrespectful thing for a host to not provide a servant to clean the feet of guests. And so the lowest task of servanthood in Jesus' day was the poor guy that was reduced to cleaning off the feet of individuals as they arrived as guests to an event. And you might remember from the biblical account in John chapter 13 that Jesus arrives at this home, and he goes into the upper room, and they're preparing to do the Passover meal together. And as they prepare to do the Passover meal together, Jesus observes that all of the disciples have come into this room with dirty feet, that none of them have taken the opportunity to not even wash their own feet. The task was so lowly, they wouldn't even wash their own feet, let alone wash the feet of another person. For the record, it does seem to me that Jesus' feet were clean. It seems to me that what Jesus did was what his disciples did not do. Maybe he arrived before them. Maybe he was the last one in. I don't know. But it seems to me that Jesus washed his own feet. So you have the Son of God, the creator of the universe, the Savior of the world, stooping to do the most menial task for himself before entering this home. He doesn't think to himself, well, a servant should have done this, and this is too low a task for me. But instead, he humbles himself. He does the task of a menial servant. He washes his own feet and then comes into the upper room and discovers there that his own disciples, his own students, have failed to do the most basic of tasks of washing their own feet. And in this moment, instead of lecturing them about, you guys march right back down there and you wash your feet before you come up in this house, like a mom would do with their kids before dinner. Let me see those hands, your hands are filthy. Go, all of you march right now to the sink and wash your hands before you eat at the table. That's a very reasonable thing for a parent to do, and would have certainly been a reasonable thing for Jesus to have done in this moment. But instead, Jesus does the most shocking thing imaginable. He begins to remove his more formal garments so he doesn't get them dirty. He gets a towel, he gets a basin, fills it with clean water, and he stoops to wash the filthy feet of these very proud disciples, and he humbles himself before them like a common menial servant. And you might remember in that story, he gets to Simon Peter. I think everyone else was too afraid to say anything, but Simon Peter finally speaks up, I think speaks for the group, the shock of the group, and says, "No way can you wash my feet." And in this moment, captured by this sculpture of Jesus washing Simon Peter's feet as part of that event, Jesus is captured in this sculpture of doing something that speaks not just to that moment and to the life of Jesus, because you might remember that Jesus says, "Do you know what I have done for you? I have left you an example for you to follow. Me, your master and Lord, has been the servant of you all. If me as the master and Lord are your servant, you should serve one another." And so in that moment, Jesus leaves for his disciples an example for them to follow. Not just to wash feet, but a broader example of when there's a time to serve other people, even if you're in a position of greater authority, of greater power or position or wealth or whatever it might be, to humble yourself before other people, regardless of station in life, and serve them. When it comes to the realm of leadership, one of the aspects of leading like Jesus is here the creator of the universe who leaves the heavenly realm where the angels right now in the presence of Jesus are yelling, "Holy, holy, holy," and they're bowed down before him, that Son of God left that heavenly realm of incredible worship and praise, stepped into this world, which would be humiliating enough or humbling enough to bear a common life like us, born into an impoverished family, too broke to afford the normal sacrifice for their firstborn son. And by the end of his ministry, Jesus has virtually nothing left of possession. But this one who has stepped out of glory steps into our world, and he humbles himself to the point of service of his own disciples. If we're going to lead like Jesus, a servant's attitude is primary. The goal is to seek the good and ministry and joy of other people over our own. Jesus himself, Paul says in Philippians chapter 2, who set aside these things, he emptied himself of his divine prerogative, his divine, the glory and worship that was his. He sets those aside and becomes a servant. He takes on a human body like us and becomes a servant to the point of death. And Paul in that text says, "Have this attitude in yourself, which was also in Christ Jesus." So we have the upper room event of Jesus washing the disciples' feet, but we have the theology of the New Testament, which expands upon that and says, this is our model. This is our standard. Our standard for leadership is servant leadership. Our standard for leadership is not to say, well, there's other people who are below me who should do these tasks, but instead to say, there's no task too low, there's no position too high or too lofty that would prevent me from serving other people. Now, we see this in a lot of places. In the church, there should be a servant attitude by all people at church, whether the pastor or any other member of the church. You see this in the workplace, where a boss is seen acting as any other employee in the way they handle their job and the way they speak about other employees. We see this in the realm of sports, in a baseball environment, where the best player on the team is a servant of all if he does the extra things. You see him in the dugout picking up trash after a game. You see them picking up baseballs after a hitting round in the tunnels. You see them in the moving of, hey, I'll get the L screen and put it out on the field. You see it in a church environment where a person will say, no, I'll pick up trash, or I'll take the trash out, or things like that. I think you see it also in the home. And so if if you're a student in your home, a lot of our life when we were students, we wake up, our parents spend a lot of their time thinking about our day, how they can help us with school, how they can help us get us to sports or music or church. But to wake up in the morning and say, how can I serve my family today? How can I be a servant of my family? If Jesus would serve his disciples like this, how then could I serve the people around me today? And so that's our devotional thought today in this area of leading like Jesus, or spiritual leadership. How does a spiritual leader lead? They lead by serving. To lead like Jesus is to lead like Jesus led. He became the servant of us all. All right, so that one's a little bit longer, and I've got some editing work to do on there. I got to zoom in on that, and I've got some other background videos I want to add to it and stuff, but the file was just so big, and then when it didn't load, I was like, all right, the editing plans I had in my mind, I jettisoned and went, okay, never mind. I'll cut all the background stuff out of there, too. My baseball players don't care about Galilean, Judean, Jewish time frame, so I'll cut those things out. And I apologize to you guys because you don't really care about baseball players pulling out L screens and picking up baseballs. But in the realm of baseball, one of the signs of someone serving their team is after a game, they walk through the dugout and they pick up all the trash. We play our home games at Dallas Baptist University. We play our home baseball games and practice at one of the nicest baseball fields in the country. I mean, it's unbelievable. We get done with the practice on a Tuesday night, and I just look around and go, I can't believe I coach baseball here. It's stupid. It's ridiculous. But anyway, you get done with the game, you look down the dugout, and you go, why are y'all treating this like this, right? And you'll have players who will say nothing and then go back through and pick everything up and pick up all the garbage. I'll watch players walk out to the hitting tunnels or way out beyond left field, and they'll walk out there, and I'll see them after a game or practice, and they'll glance in there and make sure that the baseballs have been picked up. Because when DBU comes, or their next day's practice, they don't need to be picking up baseballs after us. That's the responsibility of players. One other thing, too, that I have tried from the youngest kids I have, so if I have a 7-year-old baseball team, one of the things I always tell them to do at the end of practice or a game, I say, from here to the car, you have to tell your parents how thankful you were that they brought you here today. They didn't have to sit out here for an hour and a half in this Texas heat, but they came out here because of you. And at least showing gratitude to, I mean, there's not a lot a 7-year-old can do to help around the house. It's usually more destructive than helpful. I don't know what the age is where they go from destructive to helpful, but 7's probably on the lower end of that. Like, thank you for the help. Go help somewhere else, But they can at least express gratitude towards the people that are serving them. I think that's important. And so we want to instill in the students around us. The other thing I think, and I said this at the end because I am at my students on this a little bit, a 15-year-old, a 14-year-old wakes up and every day their parents are making decisions about them and their siblings, how to meet their needs, how to make them happy, and very little of a student, a 14-year-old, 12-year-old, is getting up in the morning and thinking, how can I serve my family? It's just not instinctive. It doesn't happen instinctively. And in fact, the way it usually happens is they're assigned chores, right? This isn't about serving, it's that I'm required to do this. And one of the things that I want to challenge my players when we get together on Tuesday at 10 a.m. on Zoom is to encourage them, hey, you're 14 years old. Yeah, the whole world revolves around you. Mom and dad have made the whole world revolve around you. They played in a tournament this weekend. They spent, 6 hours both days out there. Mom and dad sitting, it's got to be 95 degrees. I didn't go. Good luck. Michael's coaching, not me. I'm not sitting in this heat. And but those parents, so they spent the whole day, these players, the whole thing revolves around them. To break that world of, I wake up tomorrow morning, what are my parents going to do for me today? And ask the question, what can I do to serve my family? And then unsolicited, go do something. I don't know what that is. Mow the grass or 14, 15, 16, you have the ability to actually serve. And I want to encourage this in my players because I do think there's so much of their world is, and this is true of all students, children through students, is so much of their world is what are my parents doing for me today? Where are my parents taking me today? Mom, I'm bored. Dad, I'm bored, meaning you need to involve yourself in breaking my entertainment cycle here, right? Y'all know what I'm talking about? And And the notion of just getting up and going, you know what, I'm going to serve my family today. And then as church members, I think we fall into this category as well. What's the staff going to do for me today? What's the preacher doing? What's the preacher going to do today? And I think that's not the prevailing attitude of Matthew Road, for which I'm very thankful. You can't have VBS with 80 volunteers in a church that says, what's the staff going to do for me today? And in fact, I taught a couple of times, which was shocking, because I normally don't. Yeah, because Jamie was unavailable, and so I was like, I covered her class, which, by the way, my appreciation for elementary school teachers goes up every time I do something like that, because I think about this. For 30 minutes, I can do this. If you said, now do this for 5 hours or 6 hours or whatever, I'd be like, I'm out. I'm sorry, I'm out. I don't know how you do those things. I don't know how you do that. I don't know how an elementary school teacher in one room or in a room for a long time throughout the day, and you've got 20 some odd kids in there, and you're supposed to educate them and probably counsel them and mentor them and a billion other things. So I had 30 minutes with a bunch of help in the room and just going, I don't know how teachers do this. I don't know. But at Matthew Road, it's not like, well, the preacher needs to, if I weren't here all week long, it wouldn't have made any difference. Like the VBS goes off without a hitch. And it's because we have great leadership, but we also have great volunteers throughout. But this attitude of just serving, that we come to church, a part of aspect of church is, what can I do to serve? Not what can I do to get out of it? And I do think that breaks this is Soren Kierkegaard's idea, is that we perform for an audience of one. He said it frustrated him when he would go to church is that the people on the stage would perform and the people in the congregation would function as an audience, almost in evaluation or judgment of how well the performance went. And Soren Kierkegaard said what it should be is that we all gather together and we all are performing for an audience of one. And this isn't about how entertained I feel or how good that performance was, but more about what's my contribution to that. And so to break that cycle out of professional paid ministers do things, parents do things for kids, pastors do things for churches, which again, Matthew doesn't really have this attitude, but that is the prevailing attitude. To break the idea to the other direction, which is bosses are like, employees do that. My boss at Watson Wyatt, one of the things I loved about him was we'd sometimes have to work really, really late, and we're scrambling to get this project done. And I remember the first time I worked really late with him, we worked till about, 9 o'clock at night, and FedEx last drop was 10. And he's like, we got to get 3 reports from here to Loveville to drop at FedEx. He goes, come with me, I'll show you how to bind them. So he took me down into the copy room. He goes, print off 3 copies. I'll show you. And we went down there. He's like, here's how you put the little cone things, and I put them in here. How does he know all that? Because he's had to do it a bunch of times. And he never thought, well, there's someone else's job. He would just do it. And I love that about Clarence. Clarence was always a kind of guy which was like, there's not a job that's beyond my willingness to do it if it will help us do it, and I'll do any work with any employee anywhere. That wasn't the attitude of all the people in the office, but it was definitely Clarence's attitude. And so I appreciated that type of servant leadership from him. So in thinking about this text, one of the things that is intriguing about it is that John sets the context of all of this in 2 ways. There are 2 primary context-setting ideas here. Number one is that it's the Feast of Passover. That's the first issue. But the other is that his hour has come where he will depart this world and return to the Father. And the reason for his departure is that the completion or the fullness of his love for them has now come to an end. He says he loved them to the end. In other words, the fullness and completeness of the expression of his love for his disciples has now come full circle. And so these are the 2 things that are going on here. We have the Passover gathering, but we also have Jesus in the final. He is less than 24 hours away from his death, and he is less than that away from brutality, a few hours away from sheer brutality. Arrest, mistreatment, crucifixion, all of those kinds of things. And in this moment, the culmination of his love is here. And so that's the setting. It's interesting how John writes this. John says it's Passover and the fullness of the love of Jesus has now come. And it says it says that because of that, the implication is because of this, that during supper, the devil already having put in the heart of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, that he was going forth from God and was going back to God, got up from supper, laid aside his garments, taking a towel, he girded himself. All right, so all of this is background. And it's really, really important background. The other thing this tells us, and we know this by the time we get through the rest of the section, is that one of the people that he washed the feet of is Judas himself. I've wondered about this as Jesus washes Judas's feet, because he says, remember he says, Simon Peter says, wash all of me. He goes, if someone who's already had a bath doesn't need to be bathed, you just need your feet washed. But he says, you're clean. But then he goes, not all of you. Well, that means one of the people that was not clean was in the room. And we know he doesn't leave until in the midst of the meal. Jesus seems to not let them break even one thing of bread until he gets their feet clean. So I think it's a fair assumption that Jesus, though it's interesting to me, John may be making a point here that Jesus washes Judas's feet with the devil fully involved in this event. I think that may be what John's hinting at. But he doesn't say Jesus, and he washed Judas's feet. That's incredible. I think the implication is there. But he doesn't make a big deal out of it. It's more, though you could say he kind of makes a big deal out of it, because at the end of it he goes, not all of you are clean. So I guess maybe he does make a little bit of a deal out of it. But we have this situation where that's the background. And so now think through this for the disciples' perspective. We have the triumphal entry. Things are going grand. The debate during the week has been who's the greatest. We have the mom the week before, the sons of thunder, arguing with Jesus about trying to get them on the left and right hand. So it's not a surprise that if they're jockeying for this kind of position or power, that when they got to the house where this is going to take place, that none of them wanted to be seen holding the ladle. Because this would cut into the perception that they were presenting to the group that there was a pecking order of authority. And they were trying to move up that particular scale, almost like employees at a company, all trying to vie for open positions as they come open. And it's like, well, what do I want? I better be sitting next to the boss at Christmas dinner. If the next time there's a promotion, I want to get it. I got to get in his ear. And so I do think there's some element of this where they come to the place where the basins are there to wash your feet. This is probably a wealthy home in Jerusalem, because they leave Jerusalem and go out to the Mount of Olives. So they have to be in a wealthy community. Jerusalem is a very expensive place. And housing still is, but it was a very expensive place. And having a room that big, an upper room that big, means this would have been a substantial home. Yeah, this is a wealthy family. My guess is these are followers. Some have even speculated, is this someone like Nicodemus has this home there? He's allowing them permission, or someone like that. But someone has given permission, which might explain Nicodemus later on saying, we should have a trial. What if Nicodemus is the one that let him use his home? Or Joseph of Arimathea, one of these wealthy individuals. But so they have this wealthy home. And so my suspicion is that the wealthy home, Jesus told them, I want y'all gone. I don't want anyone there. I want this to be just a discussion between me and my disciples. And so probably they pulled everyone out of there, servants and everyone, saying, well, we're going to go to Aunt so-and-so's house tonight. And so they're not there. And I think maybe the servants are gone too. And so they arrive at the home. I guess it's all set up for someone to wash feet. Otherwise, Jesus would have said, they didn't provide. But instead, it seems like the issue wasn't a lack of provision, but a hard attitude, that they come into the room without washing their own feet. I remember the first time it dawned on me that Jesus had washed his own feet, and the way that landed on me. I don't know what it was about that moment, but the realization that he didn't enter the upper room with dirty feet. It doesn't say he washed his own feet first. To me, it seems pretty clear that he had washed his own feet. I wonder if he came in last. Because if he'd come in first and they'd come up and seen his clean feet, I wonder if they would have said, oh, whoops, my bad. We better go back downstairs. But my suspicion, they all had gotten up there, maybe even started reclining around the table by the time Jesus got up there, and they're so distracted, or maybe that Jesus does this so quickly that that's the first thing he does when he enters the room. It's too late for him. But my suspicion is that Jesus had washed his own feet. And so imagine this, the creator of the universe, the one who spoke water into existence, is now knelt down outside this home, washing his feet as he goes to enter into the upper room. This is known as the most menial task possible. And here Jesus is. He's got the ladle out. He's washing his own feet. And when he arrives in the upper room, does Jesus already know they have dirty feet? I don't know. Yeah, I mean, he's omniscient, but he's set aside his divine prerogatives. But he does respond to this. Now, again, if you and I were involved in this, and this had been our party that we were hosting and our event, man, this would have been lots of lectures and hands on hips, snaps and points. Hey, let's go take care of this. The way a coach yells at players for not cleaning up trash out of the dugout. That's what this moment feels like to me. Like, how dare you guys leave your empty Gatorade bottles all over this dugout? There's not a servant here for you. You don't pick your own stuff up. That's what I think most of us would have reacted that way if we'd been in charge, right? We would have said, you march right back down there and you take care of this. And it's such a unique thing, too. This Passover, think about the significance of this. The disciples, I think for them, they did not get this level of Passover the year before. Remember why? Where were they the year before? Oh, man. You got to know your Jesus chronology. 3 Passovers. We know this from John's Gospel. First Passover, Jesus turns over tables in Jerusalem and meets with Nicodemus. The second Passover, what happens? Oh, man. It's the feeding of 5,000 in a remote location in Galilee. Yeah, and so it says Passover had come. Jesus sees the crowd. He takes bread, fish, and he blesses and feeds the crowd. It becomes their Passover meal. So we know that they don't have a traditional Passover meal. They can't, because what's necessary for a Jewish person in Jesus' day to have a traditional Passover meal? What would you have to have? A lamb. And where would this lamb have to be offered? In Jerusalem. So if you're in Galilee, that means that kind of traditional, I'm sure they did things as part of celebration as a family, but not the full Passover celebration. So we're 2 years into the public ministry of Jesus before they're back in Jerusalem. And I think for the disciples, there may be some anticipation. It may be like a family getting together for Christmas. Like, man, we've been waiting to get together for a while. Finally, all things are going to work out. We're all going to be in the right place. But it's even more than that, right? All the significance there. So you add to that the triumphal entry. You add to that the mass of crowds following them around, and everyone's listening to every single word. By the time they get to the upper room, to walk by that ladle and to not wash their own feet or each other's feet, and with the attitude of, I want to be most important in the group, the whole Passover is set up for jockeying for power and position, and this is a celebration of Jesus and those kinds of things. And what they don't know is what this is really about is setting in motion the church's tradition of celebrating Jesus' broken body and spilled blood. So Jesus, if my attitude had been, fortunately for us, he's the Son of God, but if my attitude were to rise in this moment, you think about the significance for him and what he's about to do. This is where anger comes into play. This is where our anger, our frustration comes into play. And he would have been justifiably angry. He turned over tables in the temple, justifiably angry. He could have justifiably been angry here with his disciples. Here's the Passover celebration that he's about to reinstitute in his own life, and they're like, I'm not washing my feet. I don't want these guys to see me humbling myself that way, and they come traipsing up into the upper room. And so there's a lot to this. There's the humility of Jesus to wash their feet. There's the humility of Jesus to not lecture them. He doesn't lecture them. He just says, well, there's an opportunity to serve. Here's an opportunity to serve, right? That's what happens. Here's an opportunity to serve. Jesus sees the problem, and instead of lecturing them or saying, here's my role, here's your role, instead he sees an opportunity to serve. And there's a humility to this. He girds himself, takes a towel, and he begins to bend down. Notice that what's going on here. Sorry about that. I just got a text message from Donald Trump. Did you get those? Probably not. I'm probably the only one in the room that's getting personal text messages from Greg Abbott, Donald Trump. I don't know who all. I think I didn't know I was this well known. But one day you can aspire to also have to block and ignore hundreds of political campaign messages. Yeah. Man, I don't know how they figured that was a good idea, but someone picked that up the last campaign, and since then, my phone is continuously blown up over that. But anyway, all right, so let's see. See, Donald Trump distracted me. Anyway, all right, so it says he poured water in a basin, and he began to wash his disciples' feet, wiping with a towel. Now, to wash their feet, this means they're reclined at the table, right? So they're reclined at the table. You would lean on your left elbow and you recline at the table. So your feet are like right up behind the next person. And so this is really rude. We wouldn't, having dirty feet for us, if you went right now to some outdoor seating at Jake's or something, nobody would, they'd be like, okay, that's kind of gross, your feet. Wash your shoes, what's going on here? But nobody cares. We're eating on a clean table, right? But for them, this is bringing the dirt and just the world, all into this spot. And here's this sacred gathering, and it cuts into that a little bit. All right, so that means he has to humble himself. He got down on hands and knees, and he's washing their feet, like what's in that sculpture. He's washing their feet. And for the disciples, Simon Peter and the sculpture sitting in a chair, I'm highly skeptical of this. They were reclined at the table, so I think there weren't chairs. There were some pillows around. So he rolled around, and he's basically reclined at the table as Jesus washes their feet as he goes around the outside of the circle. And for the disciples, there's a bit of shock here. And I wonder why Simon Peter is the first person to say anything. It says when he came to Simon Peter, so he came to Simon Peter, that implies he had done other people first, I think, when he came to Simon Peter. So he didn't start with them. I wonder, either other people had already groused and complained about it, or is Simon Peter the first person that has the guts to articulate what I'm sure he's not the only one in the room thinking this. They were too arrogant to wash their own feet, and now because of that, here's Jesus washing their feet. So I do wonder, is Simon Peter the first one to articulate this, to say out loud what maybe the whole group was thinking? So he came to Simon Peter, Lord, do you wash my feet? Implication is, if anyone's doing feet washing, I should be washing yours. There is an interesting thing. There's some churches that do feet washings as they've added it to a third Lord's Supper, the baptism, and feet washing as a third ordinance. So there's some churches like this. For modern Americans to do this as if it's anywhere near what this is about is just silly. It's like the only way this works is if we're going to go out somewhere into some lamb pasture, some sheep pasture, walk around with a piece of leather strap on our feet, walk around the dirt, and then we do it. Now we can have a different conversation. But to walk in with Nikes on and go, oh, it's a feet washing. It's like, no, it's not. Give me a break. A better thing would be we're going to all go clean, the bathrooms or something, or we're going to all go scrub floors. We're going to all go scrub the sink, things like that. That would be more comparable, is that kind of hard, cleaning, messy, not the Nike shoes, the high-end leather shoes and all this kind of stuff. So I see those and go, yeah, you aren't really doing this right. So let me come over. I'll help y'all do it well. But you shouldn't do it in the worship center because, it's going to mess up the carpet. So what's that? Yeah, exactly. This would be better like after, they've been mowing the lawn all day long and then go, okay, now let's talk about this, So Jesus answered and said, what I do you do not realize now, but you will understand afterward. So there's more information that will come. For Simon Peter, there's no way he thought this is their last Passover together. So Peter said, never shall you wash my feet. Jesus answered, if I do not wash you, you have no part of me. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, then wash not only my feet, but also my hands and my head. I think what's going on here, there's a bit of theology here that's mixed into the servant leadership, though, which is if we're unwilling to let Jesus sacrificially serve us for salvation, then we have no part of him. And so I think this is getting to a bigger theology, which is the willingness to say, I need the help of Jesus to make me clean. If we're unwilling to say that. But it's interlaced into this whole idea of servant leadership. So in the midst of servant leadership, there's this one other heart issue of saying, if you're unwilling to say, I have need of Jesus to cleanse me, I have need of him to work in my life, then you don't have a relationship with him. And so I think that's a sidebar discussion here by Jesus and Simon Peter, apart from the servant leadership ideas here. And Jesus said to him, he who has bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not all of you. For he knew the one that was betraying him. For this reason, he said, not all of you are clean. See, that's why I think he had washed Judas's feet. Doesn't that sound like it? Like that seems like Judas is in the room, that he had washed his feet. And we know that Judas doesn't leave until after dipping into the, right? Dipping the morsel and taking it and that kind of thing. And then he went out. John says he went out and it was night. So it's a very kind of foreboding picture of his departure. All right, and so now we get to the point of this. He says, so when he had washed their feet and taken his garments and reclined at the table again, he said to them, imagine he's got their attention. Right? Like now, they were already listening pretty intently to Jesus, I think, anyway, but all eyes are really locked in now after that humiliating moment. And he says, do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. And then here's the conclusion of this whole thing. If I then, the Lord and teacher, wash your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I gave you an example that you also should do as I did to you. Which is where the feet washing as an ordinance comes from, is this verse. So they use this verse, much like Jesus says, do this in remembrance of me with the Lord's Supper. They take this as, well, this is given as an ordinance. Okay, but help me. Surely Jesus is not limiting this to only when someone else's feet are dirty that then we intervene. That's not the point of this, right? The point of this is that the most menial servant task Jesus did for them, therefore any type of service for one another, they should do. He's left them an example to follow, not just feet washing, but the whole life of serving other individuals. So this is our example. This is what is listed in Christian circles as servant leadership. That leaders should also serve. That leaders should not be in a spot where the leader is put on some kind of pedestal. If Jesus didn't put himself on a pedestal, in fact, lowered himself to the lowest spot, then we shouldn't do that either. Leaders within a home, leaders within a church, leaders within a business, leaders in the area of academics, we see this a lot in academics, that there should not be an attitude of, I'm better than you, so you need to do this task, it's below me. And that there's tasks that I could never do because they're too lowly. There's a funny story about, there's a guy working in a company out of San Antonio, a restaurant chain, and they had this tradition with their company that once a year, all the executives would go spend a day working in the restaurant, okay? And so he goes and work just behind the counter, do whatever they tell you to do. And so he said it was a funny experience. He was at this restaurant, and he was carrying the trash out to the dumpster, and he saw a buddy of his from high school. And the buddy of his came over and said, hey, and then he could tell the buddy of his was responding to the fact that 25 years after graduation, that the guy's occupation involved taking trash out at the local restaurant. And it was such a great observation. This guy said, at first I was embarrassed and then wanted to explain myself. And then he stopped. He goes, the whole reason I'm here today is to not make excuses for what I'm doing. If I'm too embarrassed to do a job because of what someone thinks, what am I saying about the employees that work for the company? They should be embarrassed about their job? And he said it was such a good moment for him, because one thing to go and do the job, it's another then to have someone who want to impress or want to, to have a high thought of you or whatever, and to absorb the fact like, it's okay. And I thought his response was really good. He wrote this article about it and just saying, it was good for me to say, it's okay if my buddy walks away. He hadn't seen him since high school or whatever, but it's okay if this old buddy of mine walks away going, wow, that guy's taking the garbage out at this restaurant. He said, why do I care? I'm never going to see this guy again, maybe outside a class reunion in another 10, 15 years. And he goes, why do I care? And I think this is important for us, that there's not jobs that we put in a spot that's below us. There's not people we put in a place where we say they're lesser somehow. I think this is really, really important. And I think one thing I love about Matthew Road is I don't sense that from people at Matthew Road in terms of serving. I don't get the sense of a deacon saying, well, I'm not doing that, which would be funny because that's what deacon means, servant. But I'm not doing that. You can see me doing those things. And the staff, I think, is outside of the pastor. The staff is really good about these kinds of things. And the deacons are really good about these things. And generally, the church as a whole is. And that work ethic and humility of service, I think, does come from a church engaging in the person and life of Jesus. I think it does. I think we're studied enough in the Scripture, studied enough in the person of Jesus to understand that the turning of life upside down on those hierarchical structures. To say, wow, if, taking the trash out needs to be done, I'll just do it. If, if serving in some capacity needs to be done, I'll just do it. And there's not a sense of, well, this job's too big or too small for me or for someone else. And I'm thankful for that. But what I long for, though, all right, so here's the only caveat to that. Since that is the culture at Matthew Road, it's been articulated a lot, and I think it's modeled a lot, that once people step on campus, that's what we do. My fear is upon driving out the entrance and onto this Matthew Road, that somehow that's like what we do at church, because that's the modeled behavior there. But get me at work or in the home or whatever the case may be, that's a different thing. And I thought about this yesterday, and this is a silly example, but I went to, Michael's coaching this baseball team. And so it's my team, but I was like, you coach, you and your friend Corbin, they're coaching. And they did really well this weekend. They went 4-0, won this tournament, which is fine. Not that I don't really care. I mean, it's good. But on Saturday, I was going to go by and pick up Roxy. I didn't want Roxy in the kennel all day long while Michael's coaching. So I go by, and he had told me earlier, don't ever tell him I told you this. He told me earlier he couldn't get the wash machine to work properly. He's like, every time I open it, there's still water in there. It's like, I'm going to figure this out. And I thought, oh, he just doesn't know what he's doing. Well, it did the same thing to me. And I start messing with this. I'm trying to figure this out. And finally, I realized it has a volume knob on it, small, medium, large, super. And if it determines while it's putting water in there that your setting is off from the clothing you have in there, it just stops. And so now I was like, okay, I get why he was, because it took me a while to figure it out. And I was like, if I hold the button down and it keep running water, so if I took my finger off, it would stop. And finally, I was like, I wonder if this knob, and I turned it, and it turned on. I was like, okay, that's the dumbest thing ever. Like, what in the world? This poor kid, I felt terrible for him. And so instead of taking Roxy home, I just washed laundry all day long. Because he was weeks behind. And again, I don't blame him. He's like, he can't. I get the frustration now. I was like, oh, he probably just doing something stupid. It's like, no, he was really trying. He goes, I kept opening it back up. It's soaking wet. And then he's trying to get it wringed out enough and then just throwing them in the dryer. It's like, and it seemed like they were clean. He's like, yeah, they never ran. And there's no way he would have known. Like, he didn't know. He was turning it on and leaving the apartment. And then it would fill up halfway and then stop because the knob wasn't right. And then he'd come back and go, "That doesn't seem like they're clean." And he was right. And as I was messing with it, I understood. And what I really wanted to do was go home and just hang out. But I was like, you know what? I need to do what would be best to serve him in this case. He didn't mean to get behind in this situation. And so I was like, you know what? I'm not driving Roxy around. I'll just do laundry. So then he called me later because they blew these two teams out. And he called me. He was like really excited, which he should have been. They killed these teams. And he said, he's talking. I said, okay, Michael, I have to apologize to you. And he says, why? I said, because I messed with your apartment. I did all the laundry. I said, I saw you were way behind. He goes, no, Dad. And, he was really gracious about it. He said, no, thank you for doing that. He said, I just couldn't figure that out. I go, I think I got it now. And so, and that's just a little thing where you just go, it's a Saturday. This isn't my preference, but I'm going to do this to try to encourage him. And I think all of us are in those situations where the people around us, you come home trying to serve there. We are at work. How can I serve someone there? And I look around a room of people that what I did for a couple hours on a Saturday, you guys do every day of your lives. And I'm very thankful for that. My fear is actually not the people in this room. My concern is that there are people that come on the church campus that know the standard of ethic for work and service here and do it here, but do we always then let that, we get home and there's dishes to be done or laundry to be done or trash to be taken out or, I don't know. You know what I'm talking about. And it's just like, you ever done this? You walk in, you're like, I don't want to do this. Right? Yeah. I don't want to do this. Right? And that's in those moments you say, okay, I don't want to do this, but I do want to serve. And serving means doing something I don't want to do. I don't think Jesus thought that the night of his crucifixion, that a great moment in the midst of this very important theological, epic, universe-altering historical event would start with him on his hands and knees with a basin washing the dirty feet of the disciples. I don't think that would have been on his agenda of saying, this seems like a great idea, a way to start the saving of the world. But then we see the heart of the Savior who walks in and says, I'm going to serve them. When I walk into the house, there's times I walk in and go, I don't want to do that. And I just think, wow, what would Jesus' attitude have been in that moment? What would he do? What would he say about my attitude at times when I walk into a situation, knowing that serving is the right thing to do, but knowing my heart's desire is I don't really want to do that. So servant attitude involves doing stuff I may or may not want to do because I do want to serve the people around me. That's hard. It's hard for me, at least. Maybe not for the rest of us, but for me it's hard. And but we're most like Jesus when we push through the things we don't want to do for the joy of the people around us, for their good. So servant leadership is a huge theme of leadership in the spiritual leadership realm. Lead like Jesus involves get a bucket, get some water, get on your hands and knees, and do the hard thing, even if we don't want to. Yeah. All right, let's pray together. God, I do thank you for this incredible example and model for us. My heart is not in that space often enough at all, Lord. I confess that. And so if we want to be like Jesus, this example that he's left, may we, as we walk into our homes, into our work spaces, into the church, may we step into each of those realms with the attitude of how can I serve the people around me? How can I enhance their joy? What can I do that would encourage them and build them up and strengthen them. Even the most menial task, may we be faithful, O God, to act like Jesus in this moment. Grab a bucket, grab a towel, get on hands and knees, whatever it takes in order to serve those around us. So God, please help us with that. As Paul himself said, have this attitude in yourself, which was also in Christ Jesus. So maybe that be not just our external actions, but our attitude itself. That our attitude would be like Jesus, who humbled himself to the point of death, even death on a cross. And so God, I pray you would bring about that transformation in us. Make us servant leaders in all the realms that you placed us in. Amen. All right, you guys have a great evening. Yeah.